Hey everyone, the Powwow guy here. Kind of want to talk about another sort of maybe mildly controversial subject within powwow tradition. Is powwow an oral tradition? Meaning, is it meant to be passed on from one person to another just via speaking it, teaching it, teaching the words, teaching the charms and such without writing anything down? Some people would say yes. And there is historical kind of evidence, I guess, to suggest that, at least in some situations, this was the way it was passed on. We have examples of people saying, I learned from my grandmother, learned from my grandfather, whatever, or my father or mother. They taught me a couple healing charms and such. Or some people will say that their teacher spoke the charm and you were required to memorize that, speak it back to them. And if you could speak it back perfectly, then you were meant to do it. If you couldn't, then you weren't meant to do it. One of my teachers spoke a charm to me, and she didn't ask me to repeat it back. She didn't care. It was you either got it or you didn't, which I did. I sucked it in and immediately went out to my car, and after I was done with her, and I wrote it down for myself. I also had another teacher demonstrate a charm for me, which I memorized watching her do it. But I've also, like a lot of people in Pennsylvania history, once The Long Lost Friend was published, we saw more and more people practicing powwow because they had a book. They had a book to follow, charms to use, and the book did not mention that this was improper to do so. And in fact, the obvious was true. It was like, if you believe this is going to work for you, then this is going to work for you. And if you're a Christian in good standing with God, this will work for you. And so that's where we have most of the testimonials throughout history, is people have been healed by someone who is using the long lost friend. There are, like a charm or a cure from the long lost friend. So while some people like to romanticize the idea of this being this oral tradition passed down for generations and generations, yeah, that may have been true in some situations, but really, like, the majority of practitioners that are in recorded history, and I'm talking about like journal articles, newspaper articles, that sort of thing, and then as we get into closer times, like recorded interviews, ice machine, uh, books, interviews for books and such, documentaries and so forth. Um, the long lost friend really was the source. So is powwow an oral tradition? In some situations, yes, it was. There are testimonials where people have said that they've learned it, like a man would learn from his father, who learned from his grandfather, and that's the case with John Blymeyer. I think even Nelson Raymeyer. I think it was passed down through same gender within the family. So those things were almost certainly passed down, by speaking it to them, teaching it, or like in the case of Nelson Raymeyer, the the people believed that in order to stop him, they needed his copy of the long lost friend, his book of spells. So, how can we say? How can we say that some of these most famous powwows throughout history learned just from a strictly oral tradition? Even the long lost friend is largely plagiarized from Egyptian secrets of Albertus Magnus. And that stuff, you can trace that back to the Catholic Church's writings. So is powwow an oral tradition? That's, maybe some people kind of tried to make it an oral tradition, but really there's more evidence to support the fact that it's, it's written stuff and it's passed down by people reading certain books and trying this stuff in those books and it working for them. I think the oral tradition part of powwow is probably the exception rather than the norm. So, for example, yeah, I learned a couple of things just by someone speaking them to me or demonstrating them to me, but I learned more from researching on my own. And I learned more from reading the books and such, trying out the charms and having either success or failure with them. I mean, that's just how you do things. So, this question of, you're not a valid powwow unless you learned via the oral tradition, says who? Says who? There are no initiations in powwow. There's nothing to mark you like your transition from a normal person into a powwow. That you don't get a certificate. There's not a college course on it. It's just you learn it, you use it, it helps other people. You're a powwow. So anyway, part of my work, the majority of my work is education, sharing the information as I learn it, sharing what works for me, what doesn't work for me, but presenting it to you so that you have the information to help keep the tradition alive. But also another aspect of my work is dispelling the myths that set all these limitations. The power, what powers powwow is God. So for us humans to put these like human limitations like, sorry, God's not going to help you if you didn't learn this from a woman. Sorry, it's not going to work for you. God won't cure someone because you actually like read this in a book and didn't learn it by someone speaking it to you. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's just like nonsense. So anyway, is powwow an oral tradition? Maybe in some instances, but I believe that's the exception rather than the norm. We have so much more evidence to suggest that people were just working with Long Lost Friend, or any of its like preceding books. Things were written down, it's just the way it is. And so if you pick up a copy of Long Lost Friend or Albertus Magnus or Romanus Bookline, or some other, text that has power charms written down in it, try them out. And if they work for you, fantastic. And if not, well, that's okay too. I mean, it's hit or miss with this stuff. And not, even the most seasoned of us, it's not always going to be 100% success rate. I mean, again, it's God that affects the change, not us. We're just doing the work. So don't get yourself so like locked into this like oral tradition versus whatever. I mean, it's just the world we live in. Human beings like to put limitations on things to make things seem special or whatever. And, it's kind of irrelevant. So that's all I had to say on that subject. Hope you're having a great night. That's all I had to say. So God bless you all. Love you guys very much, and we'll talk soon.